Welcome back to the second episode of Tirana Talks, the podcast that brings you the College of Europe experience in Tirana. Now, first and foremost, I truly hope that you enjoyed the first episode, even though, I gotta say, my mom, she definitely loves it. I'm your host, Denajda, and today we have a truly special guest. Joining me is Professor Odeta Barbullushin. Her work spans both academic as well as governmental and high-level policy-making roles, including her tenure as a Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs for Albania from 2015 to 2017. She is one of our two resident professors at the college, and today she is with me. Professor Odeta, it's truly a pleasure to have you here. How are you today?
Denajda. It's a pleasure to be here. It's indeed a very special idea, the one that you started with this podcast. I did follow the first episode and I also loved it.
Thank you.
I'm very glad to be here in the studio with you.
Thank you. Thank you for accepting the invitation, actually. Now, I want to start our conversation by pinpointing some of the key moments in your educational background. So, you studied in Budapest and then in the UK, and this was during the early 2000s. But even before that, you have completed your secondary education in Switzerland, which I believe was around 1997, right? And those were very difficult years for Albania. But if I'm not mistaken, it was also your first time actually leaving the country. How do you recollect those formative years?
Well, thank you, Dana. Well, you took me very back in time, very long back in those very difficult years, as you said. And in fact, I would start by saying that my generation has been very much marked by this experience of the early 90s. We sort of grew up or came to the age in these particularly difficult moments for Albania and the region. So we saw the shift of the regime, but we saw also the chaotic years of the early 90s. And indeed, for me, being able to study to finish my secondary education in Switzerland in an international school in Zug was quite a privilege at the time, but was also a cultural shock for me because that was the first time that I experienced living with and studying with international students from everywhere coming to study in Switzerland, taking courses in English, but also being exposed to a very different lifestyle and being exposed to a very different culture. And I think that was my first contact I had with the West, so to speak, even though during the childhood, of course, we had the opportunity to watch movies and watch shows on TV, particularly from Italy. That was our gateway to the West, as you may know well, from your parents or your family. But that was indeed my first contact with the West. And I would also mention the second experience that you all already referred to, the one in Budapest. I think that was a transformative experience in many respects. And as you mentioned earlier, I was lucky enough to spend 1997 abroad, to spend it in a very safe country away from home, and to follow developments at home only from TV and from the media. And that was overwhelmingly difficult because I was away from my family. I couldn't do anything. I saw my peers, my friends having to hide, going through that traumatic experience and me being away. But when I came back, in fact, 1997, I came back to Albania. I wanted to work as journalist at the time, quite an idealist. And in fact, I had to live with the implications of 1997 and that particularly difficult moment, as all my generation had to live with that moment and the implications of that. It was, I think, for my generation, it was very difficult to bounce back, I think, from that particularly difficult experience and that total dissolution of institutions and of safety and of any sense of security. I would say that experience of social disintegration as well. So when I went back to Budapest, that was, I would say, for me, it was a transformative experience. That was in 2003. That was only 1 year before the accession of the countries of Eastern Europe, Central and East Europe. And you could feel that vibe. It was a very particular energy and very particularly optimistic vibe in Budapest and I think across Europe in that particular moment. Mm-hmm. And one could feel you were really on the edge of something special coming up, of this moment of unification of Eastern and Western Europe. At that particular moment, I remember Budapest being an extremely international city. Everyone wanted to see now New Europe, wanted to travel to Budapest. I was lucky enough to study at Central European University in a very diverse class, and not very different, in fact, from the class at the College of Europe and your class, our class, this year, the Jacques Delors cohort in the new campus in Tirana. And I do have some sort of reminiscences of that. I do feel some similarities, and I might be a bit idealistic, so I might have a bit of pink-tainted glasses with the way I see that. But I think it signals the campus in Tirana. It signals a moment of, I think, of progress, of being also on the edge of accession, being very close to that moment of accession for the country. And I do feel that the city has also changed dramatically since then. When I came back from Budapest, it's very different from city what it was now. But also I think the difference between our part of Europe, Southeast Europe, and the rest of Europe, that gap, I think, has narrowed down dramatically.
I agree.
And in that particular moment, you could really feel the cultural shock when you would go in another country in the EU, or you go in another Western country, even within the bloc, the formerly Eastern bloc. Before going to Budapest, I always had this idea, I'm going to another Eastern European country. And of course, the difference couldn't be greater between Albania that I was leaving behind and Budapest.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love how you connected actually your educational journey with the broader context of Albania's history during that time. But on the other hand, beyond that, transitioning from academia to your governmental roles, you also have a distinguished professional background. Could you quickly walk us through your career journey?
Well, that's quite a long experience. In fact, it's almost a decade I've worked in policy. As you rightly said, I made that transition from academia to policy. In fact, I was privileged to assume a diplomatic role, a high position in government as Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs. And I was, I think, one of the youngest, maybe, Deputy Ministers of Foreign Affairs. I was only 35 when I assumed that position. Coming from academia and being an academic, and from that transiting to a policymaker, I think it's not very easy transition. It wasn't for me, at least, in my own experience. It was not that easy. Because as an academic, you're used to think everything from different perspectives. That's actually in your job description. You are meant to read a lot, to research a lot, so that you can come to conclusions which are credible, which are tested, and that is basically the credo of your profession. Whereas as a policymaker, of course, you don't have time to do that, to do research, to read a lot, to ask and to consult different resources. So you need to take quick decisions. You need to make statements, and you don't have much time to prepare. And you also need to face the challenges of much slower administration, and administration which has been there forever. So that is a set of challenges which are very different from those in academic life. But at the same time, I think the skill set that you take with you from academia, from a position as a professor, is also quite rich and quite wide. First of all, you try and seek and look for the new approaches, because being in the auditorium, teaching, you are used to being with younger people. You're used to learn from them, or at least this was and still remains my experience and my approach in teaching. So you dig for that wherever you work. You try and hunt for those more innovative approaches, creative ways to do your job. The second, I think, skill is precisely what at the beginning may appear as a challenge, that you look for different approaches or perspectives. And in diplomacy, I think that's a must. diplomacy in particular, I think, is a field where you need to understand the perspective of the other person who's sitting across the table, to understand where the other person comes from, the representative of another country or a different actor, governmental or non-governmental. And I think that's very important. So one takes with oneself, certain
I believe
skills.
it must have been like moving from a theoretical world of books to a more practical world of, well, sometimes even real life drama, I would say. But transitioning now, coming now to our favorite part, to your current role as a resident professor at the College of Europe. How are you finding it so far?
I think it's very exciting. It's a very exciting project, and indeed, it's a truly European project in the spirit that it embodies, having 32 students of 21 different nationalities in one classroom, living together in one campus. I think that really embodies that pan-European spirit. And in the context of the Tirana campus, I think one of its main advantages or its strengths is that it brings students from the region, or who have a background, a family background, some familiarity with the region, with students from EU member states. And I think the ratio, I think it's something more than 1/3 students who come from the region, and the rest come from the rest of the EU. And in that, I think you can feel that also in the classroom, in the courses I've taught, I teach. You feel that you have students who know more about the region, even though it might not be based on theories or on scholarship, but they know the region from their own first-hand experience or their parents. And then those who know more about EU institutions, who have had maybe the chance for more mobility within the EU, but know less of the region. So the program, I think, is one of the reasons why I like this project so much. The program, which is a combination of EU study, European studies, but also more in-depth area studies, a focus on Southeast Europe. And the second reason why I like it is exactly this spirit of this way of living and working in the same place, of bringing young people across Europe in one place. The third reason why I like it, I think, is that I don't feel a lot the difference between, or this distance between, campus life and city life. I lived, as you said, I lived for many years in England, where I wrote my PhD there, and I taught there for a year. And that is a very different model from continental model of universities. In this part of Europe, you have university located in the city, and I really like that. So the fact that students and faculty can mix and can in a way merge into the city without, sort of leaving the ivory tower in the afternoon, in the evening, coming back in the morning, and sort of feeling these two lives as completely separate.
And this is a part that I know that these students enjoy a lot. But I also want to touch a bit upon what you said on diversity. And actually, we've discussed this a few days ago. And I also find the diversity one of the most important and valuable things, at least for our campus. And it is a bit different from what I originally expected. I thought it would be like. Because, in the very first beginning, I thought there are these students coming from across the European Union, so they must have a really deep knowledge on the region. And what I learned along the way, what I discovered along the way, is that it's not only about the knowledge. It's not merely about the knowledge, but it's also about their genuine passion, their curiosity towards learning stuff together. And I deeply believe that in the end of it, what makes it so rewarding, the whole journey, is this willingness to learn things together. But I wanted to ask you, because you've served as a vice rector at an Albanian university and even held a one-year lecturing position in the UK, how do you describe the differences between your past teaching experiences and your current one? Because I'm interested to know, did you have to kind of essentially adapt your approach, or was it more of like a bring your A game wherever you are?
Oh, you never know what your A game is. You are always trying to learn and to improve and to get better in this profession, or any other for that matter. I think, let me respond to what you said at the beginning about expectations, about the perceptions, what the other students know. I think it has a lot to do also with entrenched stereotypes that we have about ourselves, about students from the region, about students from other countries. And I think the first, advantage or merit of such a mixed classroom with students from all over Europe, I think that it brings down, in fact, and it dissolves all this, unrealistic expectation, and even, I think, misperceptions or stereotypes we had for one country and the other, inside EU, outside EU, what European students know, how they might be better than students from the region or so. And I think that is very important. And in that sense, I think, yes, there are differences, of course, in different classrooms I've had, in different auditoriums I've had. In both in Albania and the UK, the classroom was much more homogeneous. And that, of course, particularly in the case of Albania, when you teach the classroom, you take for granted certain assumptions, particularly about or in relation to the country's geopolitical positioning, or the country's orientation, foreign policy, or the EU's positioning vis-a-vis Russia, vis-a-vis other actors. And when you are in more mixed classrooms, and I've seen that in the UK, you have to sort of be more cautious about different perspectives. And particularly in the UK, what was for me, it was a humbling experience, in fact, was to learn from a very diverse, culturally and religiously diverse classroom. So it was homogeneous in the sense of nationality, from students young people coming from the same country, but very diverse religiously and culturally. And that, of course, mirrored the makeup of that country in itself. And I remember teaching a class which was on media, culture and politics. And that was extremely interesting, because you take for granted, or you'd assume that the class also thinks or stands with you on certain sort of general positions regarding Western culture, or regarding, let's say, the cultural revolution of the 60s and other big developments. And then you realize some of the students, even though they come from the UK, they didn't know about these, because they have a very different cultural background. So you had to shift that and to adjust to that diversity. At the college, I assume the students believe in the European project, in the values, norms that the EU stands for. And that's very important for us that to teach there. At the same time, one needs to adjust the teaching to also include examples from political development, from political history of different countries. In the UK, I was teaching a class which was political history of Central Eastern Europe in the 20th century. And last semester, I was teaching political economic transition in Southeast Europe after the end of the Cold War. And of course, there are many important, significant parallelisms and similarities between the two regions, and of course, in the political history of these two sub-regions, Central Eastern Europe and Southeast Europe, both being in the Eastern, having been in the Eastern Bloc. However, there are striking differences. And whereas many examples related to, let's say, Hungary or Poland or Czech Republic do not really apply. You draw about and one particularly as a scholar of political transition, of political transformation of the early 90s, you have the tendency to draw on these big models that were built on the experience of Central Eastern Europe. Whereas in the case of Southeast Europe, you have very different realities, a very different experience of post-communism, and one needs to take into account those specific features and differences.
Yes, and since we're talking about the post-communism, because it's part of our class discussions, according to you, in what ways do you believe that the legacies of the past continue to shape the political discourse, as well as the institutional trust in the Western Balkans?
Well, that's a very important question,
Yeah,
and I
it
think
has
it
been
deserves
the core of everything that
a
we've
very
studied.
long, a very long answer. And I don't mean to to do another lecture here. We have done that last semester. But I think one feature that you rightly mentioned, and I'm glad you did, is in fact this lack of trust in institutions. And that is very deeply entrenched in political culture in this part of the region. And it goes way back. In fact, it goes back even before communism. This lack of or late birth of democratic institutions, this interrupted trajectory of democratization, and this traumatic, I would say, trajectory of democratization. I mentioned the early 90s and the chaos, that traumatic moment of 1997. These leave marks in the collective psyche, even though we're not aware. And I think as a collective community, as a people, we tend to jump very quickly from one situation or from one difficult moment to the other, while not quite stopping and taking in, reflecting about the past. So I think that's a common feature across the region, and I think this mistrust in institutions has been now exacerbated by also, I would say, a global trend, a trend which goes beyond the region, even beyond Europe, and which has to do with this normalization, I would say, of misinformation and disinformation, or malicious disinformation that we see, that is ubiquitous, is everywhere in the media, in the public sphere, in public discourse, and which tends to polarize societies rather than bring them together. It's the opposite of, in fact, of having different perspectives. Is the opposite of that. Is in fact filling the space with a lot of misinformation, a lot of untruths, which I think contributes to a complete lack of trust in facts. And that trust, the level of trust in facts, in truth, I think is fundamental to and for trust in institutions. So I think that is something we are seeing now. And in this part of Europe, I think it has deeper and graver implications because, like I said, it resonates to an already entrenched culture of mistrust in institutions. Yeah.
Yes. And actually, I couldn't agree more, because that is one of the reasons why I found your course really relevant. Because understanding the past is a crucial way to engaging in the right way with the present, and also shaping a proper future. I would say also actively and consciously shaping the future. But Professor Barbullushin, there are many shifts happening in the geopolitical arena very recently. So on one hand, we see that the new Trump administration is kind of recalibrating its priorities following the latest elections. On the other hand, we see Europe that it's trying to address it's in perpetual try actually to address some of the common challenges and issues related to security and defense strategies, but also the resurgence of the far-right narratives in several European countries, as we've also discussed in class together, that of course they are influenced by a myriad of factors: economic challenges, immigration concerns, as well as domestic political discourse. And thirdly, we cannot live without mentioning Russian and Chinese influence, towards which our region, sad to say, it still remains a bit fragile. Where do you see the Western Balkans standing in the midst of all that?
Wow, that's yes, that's also a question that deserves a podcast in its own, sort of another episode maybe. But I think, the region, I think there are some positive and not that positive aspects in the current geopolitical moment. I mean, first of all, after the war in Ukraine, what we have seen after 2022, we've seen acceleration of enlargement and accession processes for the countries of the Western Balkans, a sort of a resuscitation of enlargement, and I think that's very positive. And I mentioned the context of the war in Ukraine because I truly believe, notwithstanding the fact that these countries, in the case of North Macedonia, Albania, which opened negotiation in 2022, they deserved already, they had a positive decision of the Council since 2020 to open the negotiations, yet were it not for the war, I think I doubt if that would have happened. And I doubt if what we have seen now in relation to EU's enhanced relationship with the Balkans would have happened. So I think that's very positive. It has put a pressure on the countries of the Balkans to accelerate with reforms. And I think if we have a positive example in a couple of years from the Balkans, I think it will also show the other countries and the other political elites in the other countries in the Balkans, like, look, this is possible. Yes. Because for many years, I think what has happened is that for many in the political elites in the countries of the region, they have been very reluctant to push for reforms. And the argument has been, look, the EU is not giving us much, so why should we do more effort? Why should we try so hard? And take upon us so many costs when this is not happening. But if it does happen, I think that puts a positive pressure.
And what do you believe it will be the prospect for 2030 for Albania and Montenegro, at least, that are considered both as front runners of the EU integration process?
I think it's realistic. And I think anything less than that, I must say, it would be too little and maybe too late for the Western Balkans. I think it is realistic. But I think at the same time, in the Balkans, yes, we must see reforms for real. We must see these countries really, in a way, finish their process of post-communist transformation and modernization of their public institutions, of their democratic institutions, public administrations, and so on. And I think that's crucial. That's key to this process. And they should do that while they negotiate. This will not happen the day that the countries succeed. We won't have countries like Northern Europe, let's say, just to use some stereotypes, on the day of accession. But this is happening and will happen as we go along. The second, I think, which is very important is in the security context, which you mentioned. It is important to have these countries embedded in both European and NATO, in Euro-Atlantic community, countries like Montenegro, countries like Albania, because then I think also from a geopolitical perspective, this Adriatic side of Europe would be more secure. And I think that's very important. A third element which I would mention is socioeconomic development. The region, I think, needs to be integrated in the EU fully in the socioeconomic sense. And I think that touches upon, I think, important aspects of socioeconomic development, like the development of human capital, where, of course, the internationalization of universities, having international programs, international universities in Albania, in the region, having the countries of the region be included in the European education area or in the European digital area, in the European innovation area, and some other policy sectors, I think is key to that. Is very important to developing that human capital in the region. So I think these are some of the aspects and challenges that I see ahead. What I see in a more perhaps European or global scale is with a recent development that I predict return to more economic nationalism elsewhere. We have seen with tariffs being imposed or reimposed between countries belonging to the same security community, between allies. You must have also taken, you mentioned the first course you took, political economic transition of Southeast Europe, but you didn't take the course of this semester that I teach, regional cooperation. I think you must have you should have taken that, because this is where we discuss questions related to regionalism, and I think this is one of the challenges of regionalism today, particularly in this part of Europe, whether it will be able to fare what we have achieved in the past decade, I would say, in terms of regional cooperation, whether it will be able to survive this return of economic nationalism that we see globally.
But Professor, do you believe that the region will ever be fully integrated into the European Union? The region as a whole?
I believe that the region as a whole can be fully European, yes, and can be integrated in the EU. I don't know how. I don't know whether all. I don't think the thesis that all 6 countries will be members of the EU on one day is going to work, is going to be valid. I don't think that. But I think all countries of the Western Balkans will be like Europe, as the slogan of the changes of the 90s was.
So now, Professor, let us move to a more pleasant part of our discussion. What happens with idealism, commitment, and passion over years?
I think they are all very, very important virtues for getting ahead in life, and particularly for participating in public life. Yeah.
Is it the same as it has been, I don't know, 20 years ago for you?
You mean for me personally?
For you personally.
In terms of passion for my profession or idealism, which...
In terms of passion for your profession, idealism in general, but also commitment in your everyday life. Because sometimes people, they tend to say that, okay, the young people, they are a bit idealistic, so it will change over time. I'm really curious to know, what has it been like, your experience, your personal journey?
Oh, okay, that's not an easy question. I think for my generation, maybe every generation says that, but I think we have tend to be a bit more idealistic than what I see now with
compared
with
to us,
yes, with the young people, and I tend to be to be challenged on that by you and your peers, but. I think for us, it was primarily linked to the context, to the political changes that we saw in our own life. And we saw the 90s, we saw that change of system is possible, and our expectations were very high. So, and it was also quite, I think, normal for my generation, for my peers, to be involved in public life, to be involved in policy, to be involved in professions which, yes, had that public aspect, that engagement, because we saw the changes, even though we were very young.
Yes. But compared to our generation, how do you frame it? For us, at least, this difference that you're saying.
Yes, I think today the pressure on the young people to have certain skills to get ahead, to get a position, to get a job, to know what they do very early on. I think it's higher than it was for us then. And even though for the young people now have more opportunities and are exposed, I think to many more, have more chances than we had, the pressure, I think, is also much higher for them to perform, to have also excel in their chosen fields, as I said, to choose the right career and so on. And I think in terms of also economics, it has become more challenging. In terms of socioeconomic pressure, it has also become more challenging for the young people across Europe. Of course, for me, the experience of young people from Southeast Europe is more tangible, is closer to me. But I think the pressure is high across Europe. Yeah.
And to escape this kind of trap, what is a skill or a mindset that you think that maybe these students, we should adapt to make a meaningful impact? What do you consider to be the most important skill in this regard?
Well, I would say yes, it's important to engage in public life. It's important to engage and be active and reflect on and try to take a stance, a position on public matters, on matters of public life. Not necessarily politics as it is in traditional sense, but yes, be active in the community life. But I think continuing on challenges for the young people, and I think that's important because it responds to your question what to do or what to keep in mind, and I'm trying to avoid lecturing here. I think it's very challenging for young people now to remain individuals or to find their individual identity, because there's so much information. There are so many recipes around of how to be this and how to be that.
Yes, and sometimes it is really overwhelming even for us.
Yes, exactly. It's overwhelming. And in fact, many of these sources would tell you the same. Most of this information sort of steers you towards be yourself, be an individual, be this and be, and it's all the same at the end of the day. And so it's like this uniformity of culture, which only from, I think, it looks diverse only superficially, but it is very similar in the mechanisms, in the way it operates and so on. I think in response to that, I think one should have sort of a rather clear idea of who one is, of to be interested in the life of community, of the reality around, to be engaged, as I said. And I think a last virtue or value, which I think is of utmost importance, is empathy. And I think it's something that one strives towards. It's not that you're born with it or you are not. It's something you strive to learn about the realities of others, and to learn about one's experience, and to put yourself in the shoes of the others. And I think that's very challenging for any age, not just for the young people. But these are something I would say that one learns and one strives towards.
Yes, but maybe just to make it a little bit easier for you, imagine this kind of scenario. A young student comes to you kind of disappointed from bureaucracies, from a system that oftentimes feels a bit rigid. What would be your guidance to them? By slow progress also.
And you're referring to public administration in particular, or any other?
No, not only in public administration in general, but public administration specifically, because I know I've been there and I've had the experience of public administration. So sometimes the progress seems kind of slow, and yes, sometimes it's not the ideal scenario that one would expect.
No, you'll have hurdles and challenges everywhere you work. I think it's important to hold on, to sort of remember why you're there, remember why you're doing the job, and keep going. And I think keep your expectations low and your standards high. This is the advice I would give.
Okay, so I have another question regarding to your younger self. If you could go back in time and give your younger self an advice, what would it be?
Well, the advice to my younger self would be work less and explore the world more.
A really interesting advice. So we always love to end our episodes with a question that is in regards to books. So what is a book that you're currently reading, or an all-time favorite book that you might want to share with the audience?
Okay, well, I have this habit that I read many books simultaneously. I don't know if it's a good or bad. Many people are critical.
I
to
sometimes
that.
do it too.
I do, and particularly books which are about history or politics or about biography. I read many parallel, and whereas for fiction I'm sort of more monogamous. I start a book and then I have to finish it till to the end. So currently, well, I'm reading a number of books. One which is especially interesting is the biography of the former German Chancellor, which is of Kati Merton, is a biography of Angela Merkel, and it's very interesting because she was a chancellor in very important moment, I think, for Europe, and very important moment for the region. There was this period of time that we have seen a slowdown in EU enlargement, but we have seen I think, stronger focus on regional cooperation, on the countries of the region getting to know each other more, working more, and that is a lot to do also with the role of Germany and Merkel's government, Merkel's policy. But it's also important to see it from a gender perspective, how someone of that personality came to the helm of German politics for so many years. And a favorite book of all times for me is The Golden Notebook of Doris Lessing. I think this is a book that in these particular trying times and ideological polarization in Europe, I think one needs to go back and take some important lessons with.
Okay, so let's leave our listeners with this recommendation. You listen to Tirana Talks podcast. I just want to say a huge thank you to Professor Odeta Barbullushin for being with us in this really insightful discussion. Thank you, Professor Odeta.
Thank you, Denajda.
If you love today's episodes, make sure to follow me on Instagram and Spotify at Tirana Talks, or leave a comment under the latest post. I'm your host, Denajda, and I will be back next time with more insights and great guests. Until then, stay patient as usual and keep pushing for a better tomorrow.